Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. This is your host, ID Jester. We're going to be looking at the background history for my picture book novel of my fantasy world to come. So, what this is going to be is kind of an introductory video to the background information so that you have something to base upon what the characters and what the situation in the fantasy world is and what the history's like and why things are a certain way they are. So think of this as kind of like the author's, you know, prologue or whatever to kind of ease you into the story so you're not out of touch with things. I kind of want to make it reminiscent to say something like the Lord of the Rings movies, where in the first movie there's like about a 5 or 10 minute video basically going over the history of what had happened in the past so that when the characters and the events unfold, you have something to base that upon. So that's what we're going to be doing here in this. So this is not going to be an actual novel type uh, setup. This is going to be more of just a outline kind of setup. Obviously, there's not going to be much character development, interactions, and stuff like this. This is basically if you're sitting around a campfire in the fantasy world, this would be what your grandfather would tell you to pass on through the ages what had happened in the past age. So keep that in mind and bear that with me as we go through this. I want to try and keep these videos to about 20 to 30 minutes or so, so might have to break this up into several episodes, but this way I can get out this information to you guys and let you know. So when we do actually start the picture book fantasy novel, you'll have something to base upon the situations. You'll understand some of their terminology and you'll understand the history of what had happened before. So let's get to it. So we're looking at, again, The Past Age, picture book fantasy novel by ID Jester. This is the background history. So if you're interested in fantasy worlds, Dungeons and Dragons, or anything like that, you'll be very familiar with my fantasy world because it's very similar and it has all the normal set fantasy races such as humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, half elves, etc., etc. So if you're interested in a fantasy world such as that, it's pretty much the basis behind it. Obviously, you learn more information as we go through this. There is one addition to the fantasy world setup, a new race that's called the Wolven, and we're going to find out more about them later on. But there is a very important race added to the normal races in my fantasy world. So I guess the best place to begin is just in the beginning, and we'll start from there. So again, this is sitting around a campfire listening to your grandfather tell you this story. Obviously, there's no GPS and cell phones and computers and anything to look up. So the only way you learn things is through stories, through communicating, through talking and passing that information on to your children and their children, etc., etc. So in the beginning, we had just two great powers, and they are Thorax, the male god, and Jucifer, the female god. And all they had was one another and their great love for one another and their immense power. And they spent many, many millennium just with one another, enjoying each other's company and uh, just peacefully uh, living their existence together. And this went on for many, many millenniums until finally Thorax decided that maybe they should create something besides themselves that they could look upon, that they could gaze at, that they can enjoy together. And so he came with this idea to Lucifer, and she thought it was a good idea. And so they would use their great strength, their godlike powers, and they would start forming these strands, these magic strands, these godly essences that they would use to start creating other forms. And slowly but surely, Thorax and Lucifer each created these strands and started to weave these strands together. And soon they became one. And the God strands started to multiply as the gods spent more time and more power and more energy in creating more and more of these strands. At first, the strands didn't do much, but the gods spent much power and energy and struggled to try and move these strands, to try and form them into different objects. And slowly but surely, the strands started to coalesce together and create different forms, different shapes. And the gods used their power and they created these forms, and they decided they were going to create a place that Lucifer and Thorax could enjoy with one another. And so they spent many years and much godly power forming these strands into the universe. And inside the universe, they created a wonderful sphere. And they looked upon this sphere and they were happy. And they called this sphere Neramos. The world of Neramos and everything in the universe was created through the God strands. After resting for a little while, trying to gather some of their strength back, as this took much power for them to create this, they came to Neramos and they decided it was a wonderful and a very special place. And so they decided they were going to create wondrous and beautiful places upon Neramos so that they can walk hand in hand and share with one another. And so they did. They started creating all kinds of different beautiful locations, handcraftedly, lovingly creating these places. And the world of Neramos, life was born. The trees, the flowers, the mountains, all essences upon Neramos were created by the great gods Lucifer and Thorax. And after many years of crafting and building and wandering, they were very happy with what they created, but it still felt like an empty place. They still loved to go there and enjoy the sights, but it was still empty. It was hollow. There wasn't anything there. So Lucifer and Thorax decided to create children of their own. And once again, they used their great godly powers and they created shapes in their images of all different sizes and shapes and colors. And the races of men were born upon the world of Neramos through the God strands. Many different sizes and shapes and different colors, and they were scattered across the world of Neramos. And the gods looked upon their new children, and they smiled, and they were very happy. But they didn't want to interfere with them. They wanted to let them grow and let them prosper and see and imagine what was going to happen 1,000 years from now. What would their children do? What possibilities could they have? What could they create? What could they imagine without the gods' interferences? So Lucifer and Thorax went back to the heavens, and there they waited. They waited for 1,000 years, maybe longer, as they decided to let their children just grow upon themselves, to learn for themselves, to teach themselves, to do whatever they thought they should do. And they waited. Finally, the day came where Thorax and Lucifer decided to re-enter Neramos after a long wait. And they were so excited to see what they were going to find. Great and wondrous things. They just had so many imaginations about what their children were going to create. And when they arrived back in Neramos, they were surprised and stunned at what they found. They found these rather strange rocks in the ground that had writing upon them. and blessings and prayers for the gods to save them. What was this? What had happened? Their children had come, they had lived their lives, and then they had died. Oh, they could not believe this. They scoured the lands and they searched around, and everywhere they went, there was more death. Children of theirs that they would never see. Children of theirs that spent their whole life and died not even knowing that their gods existed. And as Thorax and Lucifer went around the world of Neramos and studied and tried to find out what was going on, they came upon a grim scene. Lady Annabella, one of the queens of the kingdoms of humans, had died the day before, and she was being buried and laid to rest in front of all of the others. And it was a beautiful but somber moment as all the other races of men were gathered around, saying their fond wishes and saying goodbye. And then they placed the great queen inside the earth of Neramos, and they buried her, never to be seen again. Oh, this was too much for Lucifer. Thousands and thousands of her children have come, have lived their entire life, and had died. She will never witness them. She will never get to hear their voice. She will never get their embrace. And this thought deeply broke her heart. She was unbearable. She can't believe this. What had happened? And she blamed Thorax. Why? What had happened? This is not the way it was meant to be. We are so looking forward to this. And we come here, and all we find is death. It's unbearable. And the more she thought about it, the more her heart grew darker and darker. Pain and suffering. Even in the skies above, in the heavens, darkened, as her heart could not bear the witness of thousands of children being come and gone before she even were able to lay their eyes upon them, to enjoy their singing, to hold their hand, or just to gaze upon them. And Lucifer went back to the heavens, distraught, inconsolable over this. She would not have anything to do with Neramos ever again. It was a horrible thing that happened. She blamed Thorax for this. He was the one that wanted this place. He's the one that wanted the children. I didn't want them. I wanted was my husband, my godly soulmate. But no, he had to have more and more, and now look at what had happened. As Lucifer went back to the heavens to be alone in her own sorrow, Thorax thought to himself, what can I do to fix this? What happened? So he came back to the world of Neramos after trying to console Lucifer. And he thought to himself, what can I do to make this right? How can I change this situation? I can't give them the power of gods. I can't give them immortality. Can I? I can't give them all. We do not have enough power for them all. Some of them will continue to die. So he decided that what he would do is he would choose 30 of the best upon the world of Neramos, and he would make them godly creatures. And so he came back, and this time is known as the choosing upon Neramos. And Thorax studied and watched. He was looking for the brightest, the strongest, the mightiest, those that had great qualities of leadership, and those that would be very happy to use their powers to show the others what they had become. And so Thorax did the choosing. He ended up choosing 30 different individuals upon the world of Neramos. The first one chosen was Baird, a human warrior with a wondrous soul. There was many others. There was Bivika and Kalit and Dwargar and many, many others. He chose some from all the different races and all the different uh, styles and sizes. He wanted everyone to be represented in the heavens. And so he chose these 30 and he brought them up to the heavens and he made them angels. And there they stayed. And he tried to bring Lucifer over to see his new children and to meet them and promised her, "These will not die. They are but angels. I have given them the power to help us. They will always be here for us." But as Thorax talked to Lucifer, she became more and more corrupted, more and more distraught over everything. As the years passed, she really found it irresponsible and had no desire to have anything to do with Neramos, to have anything to do with Thorax or any of the ones that he had chosen. And through the years, she became more and more distraught, more and more alone. Her soul got corrupted, her heart was broken and blackened, and finally, after many centuries more, Thorax had completely left alone as Lucifer became the Black Queen. The love that they once shared between Thorax and Lucifer was gone. All she wanted now was to be left alone, to not see Neramos, to not see any of the angels, and certainly not to see Thorax. So he was left all alone to gaze upon the world of Neramos, wondering what had happened. How can this wonderful existence that he had with his beautiful bride had turned so wrong? And she was inconsolable and would have nothing to do with him. And through the years past, Thorax became more and more alone, more and more isolated. He didn't know what to do. There was nothing he could do to change the situation. Everything had changed. And he knew that what was once will never be again. And coming to him to try to make him feel better was one of the chosen, ELIANTHANDRIEL, the elven queen. And she came to him and consoled him, and she was there for him. And soon, through the years, they fell in love. Thorax did no longer had Lucifer anymore, but he needed someone. And so he decided to love ELIANTHANDRIEL like he once loved Lucifer. And through their time together, Thorax and ELIANTHANDRIEL had a relationship together. And they would make love and enjoy one another's company. And the years went by together, ELIANTHANDRIEL and Thorax, until one year, ELIANTHANDRIEL became pregnant with a child of the gods. And that child was named Shadis. And he was the first of a new race called half-elves. And he was born with some mortality, and he was born with some godly powers. And Thorax and ELIANTHANDRIEL did not know what to do with him. Well, Lucifer was inconsolable in a realm all of her own. She would not look at the heavens. She would not come back to visit. She would not ever know about Shadis. And through the years, Shadis grew older. And so they decided what they would do is they would take Shadis and they would take him back and put him upon the world of Neramos, a place that Lucifer would certainly never look at again. She would not go to visit. And Shadis will go there. He will live out his life. And because he had the blood of some mortals, because ELIANTHANDRIEL was originally immortal, he still had some blood in him. And he grew old, unlike the gods, unlike the angels. and soon through the years he would perish, and their love, Elithandriel and Thorax, will never be found out in case Lucifer ever decided to join the gods again. And so this was the plan they made, and Shadis was taken to Neramos and lived his life. But because Shadis was also had godly blood in him, he did not age and grow old as fast as the other races of men. In fact, the other races only lived between 60 to 90 years old, but Shadis lived to be 900 years old or longer. He aged very slowly. And through the years, Shadis had many wives and many children, and his children had children, and those children had more children, and soon the race of half-elves started to spread across the world of Neramos. After many, many years upon the world of Neramos, Shadis had many friends and many family members, many that have come and lived and died. But he had one really good friend, and one day his friend was injured in an accident, laying on the side of the road and dying. What was Shadis going to do? He was not going to let his one and only true friend die. So he called out using the godly power, and he cured his friend. He healed him. He brought him back from the dead. And everyone there that witnessed this was in awe and amazed at what had just happened. A mortal using the power of the gods? How is this to be? How can this happen? This is amazing. Do we all have these powers? How can I get these powers? How can I help my loved ones? And so, all throughout Neramos, they prayed to the gods. Please give me the power. My aunt is sick. My brother, my sister are dying. My son has got a disease. I need the power to be able to heal, to help them, to cure them, such as Shadis has done for others upon this world. Can you grant me this power? And so they prayed to Thorax and Lucifer, asking them for this power. Please, give it to me. Grant me this power. And some of these prayers ended up finding their way into the dark realm and made their way all the way to where Lucifer was. Not many, but some managed to come. And she looked upon these prayers and she said, What? What is this? How? How can this have happened? How can there be gods upon Neramos? How can they use the powers of the gods? They're mortals. And so she had to find out what had happened. And so she came to Neramos reluctantly. And there she found Shadis, and she questioned him and asked him about it. And Shadis, not knowing, told her about his father, Thorax, and his mother, Elithandriel, and then bringing him here from the heavens, and told her the whole story. And at that moment, Lucifer knew what had happened, and she confronted Thorax. Why have you done this to me? Why would you betray me? Why would you do all of this? We were just two beings that were meant to be together, and now you've changed everything, you've ruined everything, and it's been horrible. I hate you. And she confronted him, and Thorax admitted it, and gave her his side, the situation, that she had broken their trust together, that she had left, that she had abandoned the gods. And at that moment, Thorax's heart had broken, her soul had become so corrupt. At that moment, evil was created inside Thorax. And all the essences that Thorax created were corrupted by her darkness. Her first idea was to destroy the lands of Neramos and she tried. The heavens and hells rained volcanoes and earthquakes upon the world of Neramos. She would kill all of her children. She would totally destroy everything that Thorax appreciated. And she rained death and destruction from the heavens to Neramos. But then she thought about it. Wait a minute. There's a better idea. Something else I can do that would even hurt Thorax even more. In fact, not only hurt him, but help me. And we're going to find out what that is in part 2 of the background history. Thank you so much for joining me for part 1. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this very much. It's been a pleasure to bring it to you. I'm always looking for thoughts, comments, suggestions. Again, this is more of an outline as opposed to like a novel-based character or story-driven thing. This is kind of just an outline of the past that had happened. So join me for episode number 2, where we find out what Jucifer decided to do. See you then.